I got the mic. I said, we defending our belts tonight. I said, well, unfortunately, we only got one belt. I said, because I pawned my belt.
Welcome to the inaugural episode of Dark Side of the Ring Unheard, the podcast from the hit VICETV series Dark Side of the Ring that dives into the show's deep reservoir of unaired interviews with pro wrestling's most famous and infamous. I'm Jack Encarnacio from the Lapsed Fan Wrestling Podcast, joined by my Lapsed Fan co-host and astute observer of the ring and the screen, JP Sorrow, as well as Dark Side of the Ring's executive producer and co-creator, Evan Husney. Dark Side of the Ring Season 5 premieres Tuesday, March 5th at 10 p.m. Eastern Time on VICETV with 10 all-new episodes. And Evan, the franchise just keeps spawning, keeps growing new limbs, and I guess at a certain point you just realize, wait, we're sitting on a treasure trove of stuff that just couldn't fit into a particular episode, and this stuff ought not to be stowed away forever on a server somewhere.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I think after we've finished season 5 now, and I think it's somewhere upwards of 350 interviews we've done over the past 6 years. And by doing some simple math here, I don't want to sound like Scott Steiner, but we're I think it's somewhere upwards of like 900 hours or more of footage that we have, and there's only like 2% of that has ever been used on air. So we figured that we have so much of this footage of, interviews with wrestlers family members, and so much of that is on the cutting room floor, stuff that, didn't pertain to the main story that we were covering on a particular week's episode or whatnot. And so we thought this would be a really cool sort of excuse to dig into the, Dark Side of the Ring archives and see what's there. And tonight's going to be a pretty special episode because it's New Jack, one of our favorite episodes we've ever done for the show. And sadly, he's passed on now. So this is one of his last interviews. I mean, he did one more interview with us, the next year, but this was definitely a major kind of important milestone for us, this episode and this interview in particular. So I'm glad we're sort of kicking it off with this.
Absolutely, yeah. The Pieces of Sad will be bringing you here on Dark Side of the Ring Unheard are from New Jack's, sort of dedicated sit-down interview for the episode all about him, the life and crimes of New Jack. Evan making reference there to the fact that New Jack also, before his untimely death, sat for the Dark Side cameras for the XPW episode that took place a bit further down. Well, the archives, they yearn to be free, so let us get to it. So the voice you heard at the very top of the show, that of course is that of New Jack, a wrestler most famous for his ultra-violent weapons swinging and balcony diving matches and the hardcore ECW promotion in the late 90s. JP, what was your sense of New Jack coming in, and now what's your take on this guy after taking in Dark Side of the Ring's treatment?
My familiarity with New Jack was really about reputation. I don't think, maybe I've seen one or two matches because of the Lapsed Fan, but other than that, I really just knew who he was by what I heard that he'd done. So he had that kind of reputation, but after watching the episode, I mean, holy shit, like there's
look into his eyes, and what did you see?
I saw the devil's eyes.
Yeah.
The way he talks, he's too calm and too cool to talk about the things that he did. And like to talk about, like the kid getting his head cut open and pushing the guy off the top of the scaffolding with the intent to push him to the floor and not hit the ring.
I didn't give a fuck about him, I think was the quote.
Yeah.
Right. Like, he spoke so coolly. He wasn't even angry. He wasn't resentful or remorseful about it. It just was. And that's terrifying.
Evan, that's huge. I mean, what was it like? You sat with New Jack, you did these interviews, and some of the bites will even hear you as the distant sort of, voice of the interviewer. I mean, you spent a lot of time with this guy. Tell us all about it.
Well, yeah, to take like just 2 steps back to respond to you, JP, it's like this, going into making this episode, I didn't know a ton about New Jack either. I was an ECW fan growing up. took the bus down to the mall, and for whatever reason, there was an RF video kiosk at my local mall.
Ah, you had one of those too.
Yeah, yep. And that's where I was able to buy these ECW compilations, and I was able to see that's how I saw a lot of this stuff for the first time, was on these kind of dubbed VHS tapes. And so I only knew just, the basics about New Jack. I knew, the balcony diving. I knew the Natural Born Killers, song, which was amazing. And especially that playing throughout the whole match was a great touch. And so, I had his action figure, of course, from the ECW original figures. And but I didn't know a lot about mass transit. I knew a little bit about some of these little incidences and these very controversial moments that he's at the center of. But I didn't know a whole lot. And one of the things that, was very clear to me when we sat down with an interview with him, and as we're exploring the themes of his story, was, Jason and I, who's the co-creator of Darkside and also the director, he and I loved, I think what made this show, what made Darkside successful and captivated people when they first were watching it was anything having to do with the blurred lines of wrestling, where does reality and fiction collide, that sort of blur between those things, the kayfabe of it all. And this story definitely hits on that, because what we set out to do with this episode was sort of examine, where do you draw the line, not only between New Jack, the character, and Jerome Young, the person, that's of course his real name, his shoot name, or where do you draw the line between wrestling performance, cooperation, and felonious assault, as Jim Cornette calls it. And so that was kind of the thesis going into this, was trying to explain that. Now, sitting with New Jack and interviewing him, I have to also explain this because it was very interesting circumstances, but I wasn't sure. I think about 85% of the time I was talking to New Jack, the character. I'm pretty certain, and as the seasons would roll on and as we would do many more interviews and get up to that 300 level, of interviews, it was a little easier to detect who you were talking to. But in this moment, it really felt like New Jack, the character. And I have to say, when I first reached out to him and I was contacting him about being a part of the show, I was very intimidated by the lore and legend of New Jack, especially after I'd started researching him more going into this. So my first ever phone call with him was very brief and to the point. I think the only word he ever said on the phone to me was, yeah.
Better than no.
Which, yes, very true, very true. But it was like, hey, I'm this guy. We have a show on TV about wrestling, and we want to interview you. We want to do, your story. So would you be into that? Yeah. And that was it. And so we actually traveled all the way out to, I think he lived in Greensboro, North Carolina. And we went all the way to Greensboro on just basically him just saying, yeah, we didn't know anything else. Hopefully this was going to work out. Jason and I had scouted some locations on the internet to what would be a really cool stylistic elevated look for New Jack. What would be not just a Ramada Inn shoot interview style thing, like hotel room. And that's what you would see with New Jack, in his previous interviews, is most of them are like the RF video shoot interview look. So we were trying to figure out what would be something that would really, elevate the interview and make it much more cinematic. And Jason had the idea of an old movie theater, which I thought was cool. This idea of, putting him on this, it was like a movie palace from the turn of the century or something. And it was putting him on stage and having the balconies of seats behind him kind of echoed the look and feel of his balcony dives a little bit, and so and since so much of this is about performance and, is it a performance or not, that also evoked that by having empty audience seats behind him. So it was a cool idea. So we set it up. We went to Greensboro. Long story short, I'll get to the point. We get there and I did not realize that we accidentally booked a theater 2 hours away in a completely different town than where we were and where he was. So I am just like freaking out because I'm already intimidated of New Jack, and now to have to call him and like cop to a fucking
That might not
fuck
be
up
another
in amateur hour. Yeah, I know. Well, I was picturing myself like, with a blade skull deep in my forehead, moment, just a few hours from now. So I was terrified because it was like, of all the interviews to have a big, fuck up on, not this one. So I basically was like, well, I didn't want to sacrifice this location because I really wanted to use it. And so what I did is I at the last second, I was like, let's get him a fucking limo. Okay, we'll get him a limo. It'll show up at his house, pick him up. We'll put whatever drinks he wants in there, and this, stretch limo will take him all the way to Durham, the other town that's like almost 2 hours away. And so I called him and said, all right, limo's picking you up, man. There's going to be like, what do you want in there? And he was like, vodka, orange juice. And I was like, all right, let's go. And so he got in the limo, vodka, orange juice was there, and he drove and he got to the location and he showed up and had a few drinks.
I was kind of hoping you'd say, I'd like New Jack and Coke.
Oh, man. But I guess vodka OJ is his thing. And so he shows up and no small talk. There is most of the interviews that we've done, we try to establish a little rapport, some common ground, a little chit chat, break the ice beforehand. Not with New Jack. It was very monosyllabic, and it just was like, ooh, man, it made me even more intimidated because I couldn't connect with him at all. But as soon as the camera turned on, man, he turned on, and it was just like he clicked into that character straight away. And I really don't think he knew what he was signing up for exactly, because I explained it so probably poorly on the phone. And it was I think he just thought it was another Mark Shoot interview, for some, wrestling website or something. I don't think he understood this was for television and it was a larger production. And because he turned to me and he was like, right before we turned on the camera, he said, is a lot of people going to see this? And I was like, and I didn't want to quite say, yeah, some will see it, because I didn't want to quite say, I didn't want to give it, because I didn't want it to affect his performance necessarily, or his interview, if you will. And it didn't, and he just launched full into it. But I think had he known it was what it was, more of what it was appropriately, I think he might have been more out of character. And he told me that afterwards, after the interview, and it aired and it became a thing. He said, if I had known, I might have done the interview a little differently.
Yeah, he's got those gears, and that's what you find interviewing pro wrestlers, over and over again, is how they deal with you interpersonally when the light isn't on is no indication of what you're going to actually be dealing with when the cameras are rolling, because that's their stock and trade. And as you mentioned, sadly, Jerome Young, New Jack, passed away May 14th, 2021, reportedly of a heart attack in Greensboro, North Carolina. And this is something we're going to try to do here on Dark Side of the Ring Unheard. We're going to try to sort of resurrect voices that are in the archives that have passed since they sat for Dark Side cameras. And sadly enough, and it's really, of course, a recurrent theme in the business of professional wrestling, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of folks that were just spry and full of piss and vinegar when they sat for you guys and are no longer with us. And New Jack is indeed among them. So let's get to the archives. This is the first piece of sound. And just in terms of setting the stage a bit, anyone who saw the episode knows that really New Jack's breakthrough platform in the pro wrestling business was a territorial area called Smoky Mountain Wrestling, which was promoted by longtime wrestling manager and just all-around connoisseur Jim Cornette. And in Smoky Mountain, with his partner Mustafa, New Jack created a tag team called the Gangstas, which was just straight for the jugular, the hardest core interviews, South Central LA, Compton style, braggadocio, and just making light of the O.J. Simpson murders. That's a very compelling part of the documentary and his story.
Didn't he call my boy O.J. Simpson in one of those promos?
He goes, shout out to my boy O.J. Simpson. Keep up the good work. That's one less we got to worry about.
Oh, my God.
And Smoky Mountain, right? So you're talking about a crowd that is very easy to inflame the passions of when someone steps on television, particularly an African American, and says these things. And this will be a theme throughout a lot of the things New Jack told you, and pretty much any interview he's ever done, a shoot interview or a legitimate interview, if you will. He's dealing with and leveraging the racism, frankly, that he encounters from the wrestling audiences he performs for, really from about the the mid 90s through to the late 90s, though in this particular earlier stage of his career, he's seeing a lot more of it because he's working smaller venues in the American Southeast, and it's a little more, a little harder edged in that regard.
I mean, this was the most fascinating aspect to his story and to the episode, in my opinion, was how he integrated into Smoky Mountain, and the idea, and New Jack, he has a lot of wit, to accompany the character and the things he would do to provoke the predominantly white audience down there. And I just have, it's fascinating to see that, and I think it's brilliant that he decided to sort of take all of the stereotypes that were being created by the media around that time and that post-Rodney King sort of world, with the rise of gangster rap, all the stuff that you were hearing on the news and, white America and the fears of the black community. He was taking all those stereotypes and throwing it right back in the faces of all these people who were at these wrestling matches. And it was very cutting edge, and it was very prescient. And I think Jim Cornette deserves a lot of credit for that too, because, he would play with that more. He would play with what was taking something right out of the headlines and putting it in the ring at that time. I mean, he did it also with Tammy Sitch when, she's kind of playing this, Hillary Clinton admirer, or whatever she was. So he was really kind of on the forefront of what was going on in culture and in the media at the time. And I think New Jack, I mean, obviously you need someone as skilled as New Jack in order to really pull that off, so it's not cheesy or corny. And man, boy, did he made it scary, and he made it real. And just a really fascinating part of this whole story.
Yeah, so we're talking about the Smoky Mountains, the Appalachian Mountains, the Knoxville, Tennessee part of the United States, which is a part of the country that Jim Cornette hails from, so he knows it intimately well. He knows kind of the animus of the people. He knows what buttons to press, just as you said, and he found a very willing accomplice in New Jack. So this piece of sound is him recalling bringing 8x10s, as wrestlers have done forever, to events to try to make some extra money off what they would call gimmick sales, where you basically sell signed 8x10s and signed anything to the fans in between the matches and during intermission. And it's going to be kind of hard for the Gangstas to move a lot of those because they're so hated because of the things they've been saying on the microphone and the way they've been portraying themselves in the ring, as we talked about. So they're working a show with a famous, legendary tag team in the pro wrestling business, the Rock and Roll Express, and Ricky Morton, who's one half of that tag team, has a suggestion for how New Jack still might be able to move 8x10s down in Smoky Mountain without necessarily being embraced as a great guy. There is going to be a bit of a off-color language and quite a bit of slurs being deployed by New Jack here.
One of the funny things was one day I had some 8x10 pictures. I couldn't sell the picture if I fucking wanted to because they just fucking hated me. And Ricky was like, Jack, give me the picture. So I gave Ricky the picture, and he drew a circle around my face and put a slash mark through it. I said, what you want me to do with this? He said, let me sell your pictures. He said, and they'll buy them, and I'll draw a slash mark through it and sign it, Ricky Morton, Rock and Roll Express. He said, and they gonna buy your pictures. I said, you think that'll work? He said, Jack, trust me. So I gave Ricky my pictures, and he went out there and was selling them. So they bought all my pictures. They was holding them up, fucking nigger, look at this, you fucking nigger. You got a slash mark through your face, you goddamn nigger. You know what I mean? And I was like, just keep buying my shit. And I'll put over like, oh, I fucking hate y'all for doing this shit, y'all fucking suck. And Ricky collected my money and gave it to me at the end of the night. You know what I mean? And it was like, it went over like a motherfucker, but they didn't understand because they too goddamn stupid. You know what I mean? But that's what we did, and it got over.
That's pro wrestling right there.
That's a brilliant way to kind of manipulate the market and still, you're making that money. That's amazing. What if Ricky Morton?
Of all the guys to suggest it to.
Oh man, the living walking gimmick, Ricky Morton. But the interesting thing about that too is it kind of also relates to one aspect of the episode itself is D'Lo Brown talks about in the episode about this strange dichotomy that none of his peers could quite understand, is this idea, or people who are friends of his or family of his that isn't in wrestling, that, you know, what he's trying to do as a heel is he's trying to provoke the crowd to hate him. And if they do, you know, start, you know, yelling racial epithets at him, that's like a sign of a good job, you know, in wrestling, in the upside down world that is wrestling. And so it's just a fascinating, you know, microcosm of society on its head that we have in this world of Smoky Mountain. And and of course, you know, they were also trying some pretty radical things here, you know, with Ricky Morton and New Jack. I just remembered that the angle that they were working during this time, I don't know if you guys remember this, but they were working an angle where it was Smoky Mountain was doing their version of the Rodney King beating,
Yes.
where it was Ricky Morton getting beaten.
Just like
with
Reginald,
a nightstick.
was it? Yeah,
Right.
The white trucker that was pulled out of the truck and beat up on the news. Yeah,
Right. So that's the image they're going for.
Reginald Denny.
Reginald Denny, that's right, in order to get the heat on the gangstas, you know, and that's true upside down world if you really think about it.
Reading through the whole transcript of this interview, and having seen the episode and having seen New Jack interviewed a bunch of times, you know, one thing that really comes across is, as much as he was, you know, willing to boldly face down, you know, the racial epithets that he encountered, and as much as he seemed so calm, cool, and collected in terms of, like we just showed in that clip, flipping it into commerce that fattened his wallet, at the same time, you couldn't help but come away with the sense that New Jack was, in some way he wouldn't quite acknowledge, bruised by every instance of racism that he encountered. He doesn't forget a name. He's got receipts. You know what I mean? He's calling out everyone who's ever used the N-word around him. And I feel like his wrestling life story is really one of, you know, I made money off that racist. I made money off that racist. It's kind of like a way to even the score in his mind. I hope I'm not reading too much into that, but I sort of feel like that's a big animating factor in his life and career.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, even reading his book, you know, he published an autobiography a few years before he passed, and he addressed a lot of that in there, in terms of, you know, calling some people out, and also, you know, you can tell even in our episode that a huge motivating factor of even some of the violence of where this story goes is sort of triggered, you know, by some of the racism that he is experiencing in this business.
Another page from that book, I suppose you could say, is our next piece of sound. So he's describing a scene in which he and his partner, Mustafa, who were the Smoky Mountain Tag Team Champions, Mustafa forgot his tag title belt at home, okay? He didn't bring the belt to the show. It happens.
He was smoking pencil shavings and forgot his fucking tag belt. Yeah, go on.
One may be related to the other, but both definitely happened. And here he is, New Jack, Johnny on the spot, trying to think of a way to leverage this into something advantageous, something that might even accentuate the character and evoke the passions of the crowd again, in a very defiant way. You know, this is not necessarily a fine artiste at work here. This is the fuck you, motherfucker kind of guy.
Dude, he's so good, which you'll see here in this clip, thinking on his feet,
Yep.
trying to see, and this is what I think really being a good wrestler is kind of that improv of what's going to be, you know, the best, like I said, wittiest. He's very witty. What's going to work? That's going to really work for not only the situation, the storyline, my character, his character, and it's beautiful.
So he had some work done on his car shortly before this episode where the belt was forgotten. And so in that car, he had a big pink sheet of paper, and he taped it to his shirt as, you know, Jim Cornette, the promoter, expressed some fair degree of consternation that the belt was forgotten, and it might be a difficult thing to leverage. But they got one belt, and that is all New Jack needed. Listen to this.
I got the mic. I said, we defending our belts tonight. I said, well, unfortunately, we only got one belt. I said, because I pawned my belt. I said, so if y'all beat us, here's the pawn ticket, and I tear it off my shirt. I said, here's the pawn ticket. You go down to Knoxville, you get it out the pawn shop. And there was a white guy sitting, he was like a grandfather. He had a little kid with him. He said, ain't this some shit? The first nigga tag team partner champions we got, and y'all done pawned the belt. He said, I don't want to see this shit. He got up and got his grandkid and walked out.
Oh, my God.
Oh my God.
Everybody else started booing us.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And that was just some shit I came up with off the top of my head. And I was like, we're going to do it. Fuck it, we did it. And we did it.
Is this an evil genius, JP? What do you...
He's got some incredible creativity, like to kind of think of that shit on the fly and to just let it go. That's a brilliant, making chicken salad out of chicken shit. That's absolutely incredible.
You want the belts? Beat us and go to the pawn shop and get it.
That would have been a good vignette too if they would have filmed that.
Oh, they should have went with it, man. I would have run with that all day.
Totally.
And then when they get there, they get jacked around and
totally. They get jumped at the pawn shop.
Totally. Or like the pawn shop guy didn't even know they were sending him his way. They could have sent him to Carver Reed, Todd Gordon's place in Philly.
Hearing that back, it's like I'm sure that's going to happen a lot when we're going through these archives and listening back to some of these and remembering these. When I originally did the interview and thinking, fuck, like that's something that really could have been in the episode and been pretty great.
Oh yeah, get over that quick, Evan. That's going to happen to you just about every 10 minutes on this series.
No, I know.
That's why we're doing it, right? Because it's all there.
Yeah, it's so good, and it's like if I remember in the episode, there is kind of a little montage of New Jack talking about different, ideas and bringing the creative mindset to this very, sort of crazy, fucked up storyline. But, the idea of him dragging out the white baby doll and the noose and showing that to the crowd and stuff. And it's just like, man, he was being so provocative. Like if you look at, this is before ECW, this is before Attitude Era, this is before any of that stuff where, any wrestling promotions were getting really that edgy. I mean, he was doing some really cutting edge provocative shit,
Absolutely.
And it's just amazing to see,
And he was really steeled for the potential of a mad rush from angry spectators from not only a life of crime, and drug dealing, as he admits to. And, this is a guy that was driving high-end automobiles before he ever got into the pro wrestling business. He talked to you guys about that by working the streets and working the drug trade. Of course, he had a horrendous upbringing, to hear him tell it, in terms of the domestic life that he had to get acclimated to. And further, I mean, this is a guy who was a bounty hunter, and it was talked about a bit with him. He helped make ends meet by hunting down people that the law couldn't get their hands on or didn't want to get their hands on. And this is a fun twist, because what we're going to play for you now is not New Jack talking, but in fact the aforementioned D'Lo Brown. Now, D'Lo Brown was very well known in the WWF as a member of the Nation of Domination, a European champion during the famous Attitude Era of the late 90s. And he got his start working alongside the Gangstas in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, sort of adopting much the same gimmick and look and sort of presence that he would carry into the WWF as a member of the Nation of Domination. So in a lot of ways, D'Lo traces a lot of, character that he was able to take to national exposure to New Jack.
Just to set this up, before we play it, again, going back to New Jack's biography, yes, he also in that, you should definitely check it out too. It's a brisk read, and he gets into a lot of the same stuff, but as our episode, but he expands upon it even further. And he does talk about his violent upbringing, his very traumatic violent upbringing. And he also talks about, kind of getting into a life of crime. And in his teenage high school years, he was robbing convenience stores at gunpoint. He was the guy that was basically, had the gun pointed at a store clerk and would scare the shit out of him while his friends would, loot everything. And he got caught doing this. He got arrested. And he went to jail for almost 2 years. And when he got out, he did not know what to do with himself. He had a sort of maybe promising football career if he would have stayed with it in school, but that was totally gone now after being out of prison. And he basically fell into bounty hunting. That was the thing that he felt that he could do, and he could stomach it, and he could have the fortitude of going in and dragging in people, scaring the shit out of them, and dragging them into to bail bondsmen, wherever he was. And so this is where he made a lot of his money. And then simultaneously he got into dealing drugs, and it was this kind of like quasi bad lieutenant thing where, it kind of gave him this get out of jail free card, because on one end he's working for the law, being a bounty hunter, but then, he gets to know all the cops, he gets to know, any sort of law enforcement person. and then that person's always going to wave him through anywhere he goes. And of course, he's carrying drugs on him. So he was living this kind of dual life, and he was going very fast, and it was getting very crazy and out of control. And that's when he decided to kind of settle down a little bit and get into wrestling. And I say a little bit. But he would still, from time to time, even when he was wrestling, he would pick up bounties, and he would go out and like a bail bondsman would call him. And after a match, Jack would score a bounty. And like, I always thought that'd be a great premise for a movie, like a day in the life of a wrestler who's also a bounty hunter, wrestler by day, bounty hunter by night. So let's play. He
was also running drugs the whole time.
Yeah, he was running drugs the whole time. Jesus Christ. Yeah.
This is D'Lo Brown, who sat for the cameras to talk about New Jack, and it's almost better that we hear a third-party perspective on New Jack as the bounty hunter than New Jack himself. So here he is recalling the one time that he was convinced to go with New Jack on a hunt.
He ever talk about his bounty hunting days with you?
I went on one bounty hunt with Jack.
Okay, hold on a second here. All right. Okay. What happened?
So we were doing a show up in Kentucky somewhere, and this is in the early days of cell phones. So Jack gets a call, and ironically, there's this guy who's like 2 towns away. That's one in Atlanta, and 2 towns away from where we're wrestling. And they called Jack and say, "Hey, you wanna get this collar?" So we roll up to this guy's house. It's like 2 a.m. It's pitch black. Jack goes, "I want you to go run the back door. Stand there. If somebody comes out that back door, take their head off."
Oh, my God.
Okay. So now, I'm a black guy in Kentucky standing in a dark backyard looking at someone's back door.
Oh.
This is not a great idea. And Jack's going to go through the front. I stand there and I'm waiting. I'm ready to pounce. I'm ready to take somebody's head off. Luckily, no one came out of that back door because everything went through my mind, whether someone's going to come out with a shotgun or come out blaze of glory, or if someone's going to walk up behind me and shoot me. All that goes in your mind afterwards. So Jack gets the guy. We put him in the car. We've got to drive all the way straight to Atlanta. Jack has given me the rules. He's like, "Hey, the guy's handcuffed, but keep your hand on the seat button, here. So if he gets the cuffs off and he tries to choke you, you can pop the seat back, fly back, and then you can, you're at even with him again." He's giving me all the rules what to do, and he goes, "Do not fall asleep. You can't fall asleep. You can't fall asleep." I spent the next 7 hours scared driving down the highway.
Oh, my God.
Looking at the rear view the whole time,
Oh, my
JP. I mean, he can make a move. Like, yeah, that was the last one he went on. But there's a trick. If you're looking for news you can use here on Dark Side of the Ring Unheard, keep your hand on the seat recliner when you have a criminal in the back seat, because that's the way to counteract a chokehold.
Holy shit.
One thing I'm a little remiss that I didn't ask New Jack about during this interview. I should have mentioned this at the top of the show too. One of my big introductions to New Jack, probably the first time I maybe even saw New Jack, was through the film Beyond the Mat. That was really my introduction to him, which is, his appearance in that film is very funny, where he's auditioning to, be an actor, and it's pretty crazy and everything. But in that's where the rumor sort of started, where he dropped the line that he had, 7 justifiable homicides to his name from being a bounty hunter. And that was one thing that I didn't get a chance to ask him about. But in his book, he does get into that, and he attributes that to just rumor and innuendo that obviously he's created, that spawned into something much greater. But he said he never killed anybody on a bounty hunting job. However, he had a partner once that had a gun that needed to use it in self-defense. And Jack said something like, "Well, I used my knife, after the fact a few times, in that encounter." So,
Oh, my God.
Yeah, it doesn't count as a murder if the guy's already a corpse when you stick the blade in.
exactly. So it's like, oh my God. But yeah, but it is something that I wish we would have had the runtime to get into, is just his whole bounty hunting career. Because there's been, he's done like reality shows just on that. He's filmed pilots for them, and it's a huge part of his life.
Something tells me the further we go here on Dark Side of the Ring Unheard that we'll get a bit more of a look at that dual life bounty hunter pro wrestler existence.
Yeah.
Some other guests in the hopper.
Oh, we will. Oh, definitely.
JP, what do you remember about the Nation of Domination?
Well, that's a loaded question. I remember a lot about
Tell the people.
The Nation of Domination? I mean, it wasn't based on like the Black Panthers. It was the
It's more the Nation of Islam.
Nation of Islam.
Louis Farrakhan, yeah.
That's what it was, yeah.
I remember being kind of bummed when Farouk fired everybody except for the core four, because I liked it with the all these, you know, these guys who didn't even fucking wrestle. They just, you know,
like an army of bodyguards.
Yeah, I liked the posse. I loved the posse.
I like the song. The song was awesome.
Oh yeah, it's one of the great Attitude Era theme songs.
Yeah.
Kind of like Unicron's song in Transformers the movie.
So, among that supporting cast you're referencing there, JP, was in fact D'Lo Brown. That was his entree into the WWF.
He's the one. He's the one who took the Pearl River plunge from Ahmed Johnson at the '96 Rumble.
97, yeah.
97 Rumble.
Watch him crash through that table. Absolutely, big spot. And so D'Lo gets cast in this. You know, it's like a black supremacist kind of like stable. And, you know, Farouk, aka Ron Simmons, known perhaps even better in pro wrestling as Ron Simmons, though Farouk was his WWF name through and through, you know, is making these speeches about, you know, being held down and all of that. And you would think, you know, that New Jack's phone might ring for a stable like this, because he would add such tremendous menace. And clearly with the D'Lo Brown influence, there's some connective tissue between the Gangstas gimmick and what they were trying.
And especially Jim Cornette being at WWF at the time, too. Or eventually right there, you would think, oh, I got somebody for this if you're going to do this.
To vouch for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, huge. That's always huge in wrestling, is that common DNA of, I've booked this guy before he got over, and now I have to successfully book in this new promotion. I'm going to lean on people I know that have delivered for me before. And, you know, one might think, yeah, but it's New Jack. He's got all this baggage. He's kind of a wild man. Maybe that's not the best for the... while WWF was taking a lot more risks in terms of more risque storylines at that particular point in time, perhaps New Jack was a risk too great. But New Jack told Dark Side Cameras that, in fact, there was some outreach about including him in the Nation of Domination. And to hear New Jack tell it, he just was not interested.
They had asked me, but I want to be a part of it. But they were like, you'll be behind Ron Simmons.
Uh-oh.
I said, no disrespect to Ron. I said, but I'll eat him alive cutting promos. Because I would eat his ass alive. They're like, no, want you to be a backup singer. I said, no, suck my dick.
That's right.
You know, I'm like, I'm not being backup to Ron. And they went on, The Rock was a part of it. Fucking... everybody that was a top guy in WWE was a part of the Nation of Domination. But that was the Gangsters. And everybody knew it was the Gangsters. And they would come to me, people would come to me like, Jack, why ain't you a part of that? You know what I mean? I'd be like, hey man, it's whatever, you know what I mean? But they didn't want to take a chance on me. I was like, fuck them.
What did you think of the Nation of Domination?
I saw the shit like twice. And I was just like, get the fuck out of here with that shit. I mean, it was fucking corny as fuck. But they couldn't touch me, and they knew they couldn't touch me. I mean, like I said, if you put me and anybody in the ring and told us to cut a promo, I eat you alive.
And it'd probably be one and done, because he'd probably say something that would get him sent home as well.
It's not taking anything away from any of the Nation guys, but there's only one top guy in that.
Just The Rock, yeah.
It's just The Rock.
But it's huge in that it was the springboard for The Rock to become a singles megastar in WWF, that stable.
Imagine New Jack, though, in the Nation.
He would steal every scene he was in.
It might have been a little bit too ahead of its time for him, because I'm guessing, I'm not sure when this would have been, if it would have been 96 or it would have been 97 when they're talking about this. But that might have been a little too cutting edge for New Jack to be in there, because he hadn't really quite made a name yet, right, at ECW, or he was just kind of, I'm trying to get my timeline
Yeah,
straight.
well, this would have been 97.
Yeah.
When they were sort of casting the Nation beyond
Right.
Farouk, because Farouk was still that
That's right.
Roman gladiator character in 96, that ill-fated one.
Oh,
Remember
God.
that? Farouk Assad,
Right.
which, you know, Elsewhere in the transcript, New Jack has some fun with that name. He calls him Saba Simba, mixing him up for Tony Atlas.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I hear Farouk Assad and I get hungry. So I'm thinking carne asada. Did they have Farouk Asada?
No A on the end. Yeah, Farouk Asada would have been a much different play.
The side of rice and beans, please.
That would have been 1987. Yeah.
Yeah, that would have right. That would have been something Jesse Ventura would have said.
Yeah,
Saturday Night's Main Event.
right.
I order the Farouk Asada
Right.
with rice and beans.
So there he is, and 96. Yeah, by then the Gangsters had become the ultra-violent, a jewel in the crown of ECW. It wasn't like New Jack hadn't become his own sort of cult thing yet. It was still very much about the tag team, but they were doing, the typical hyper-violent matches and had their spot as an ECW cornerstone. Yeah, that's wild to think about. I could never see it commencing. I mean, New Jack, he wasn't, I don't know. He didn't really get a chance to show beyond Smoky Mountain, where he actually did do some more traditional pro wrestling style matches, and he had skills. He was well trained.
Sure. Yeah.
But I'm not sure if he could have held up to what they were looking for in ring back then, which wasn't not a lot, but I would be really interested to talk to Adilo, and say you know what it took to make it on that circuit. Like, what would New Jack have had to adjust?
He probably wouldn't have gone for it, but it would have been interesting to see if New Jack just would have been a mouthpiece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
what would have happened? Maybe he didn't need to wrestle. Maybe he just needed to talk, and that would have been it, and come up with ideas. He could have been, amazing, but maybe it was just too early for WWF, where they would obviously get more risque and push boundaries even more into like 98, 99, and 2000 and stuff, but who knows?
JP, any thoughts on the part of the Dark Side documentary on New Jack where he repeatedly stabs Hunter Red in the back of the head?
He's a person that I'm glad I'm never going to have the chance to meet. Like, I'm honestly, there are people, I don't know. I don't think I could have, I don't know. I would have been so scared doing what you did, Evan, like going to an interview. I'd be a complete wimp about it. No question.
Yeah. I definitely was in the first interview. Definitely. Because a lot of that got to my head in terms of thinking about mass transit. I had seen the footage of Hunter Red, before the interview. And so it was like fresh in my head and I was like, oh my God. And it's just the more and more I did, like when we did the interview and then cutting the episode and then of course communicating with Jack, which we did a fair bit after the episode came out. It was just like, I really think that, he definitely was playing that gimmick. He was playing that character. Like I said, probably 85% of the interview is interviewing New Jack, not Jerome Young. And I do think that, like a lot of wrestlers, you think about Randy Savage, you think about Ric Flair to some extent, like these guys who develop personas, and as soon as that switch turned on, it never turned off. I sort of think that, New Jack he has created that persona for some level of trauma or some, something that all the experiences he's had in his life. And I think when he goes into that character, that's the dark and disturbing side of him. Whereas, Jerome Young, I think is a more centered, funny person. Cause you hear other people talk about him. Like you hear Sandman talk about him. I've heard other D-Lo talk about him, even off camera, candidly, and talking about that he is a funny, nice sort of guy. But, I don't think someone like me in this situation is ever going to genuinely see that side, And it's interesting with Hunter Red, if we can set that up, this is obviously as grim as it gets in the episode. And especially as these incidents and controversial moments with New Jack, as they get, as they go on in the episode from one to the next, like you go from, the XPW thing with Vic Grimes, crazy spectacle of him throwing him off the scaffolding. Then you go to Gypsy Joe and you're starting to see, okay.
Gypsy Joe, by the way, is like an octogenarian that New Jack began to absolutely assault during the course of a wrestling match, and for real.
Yeah, he's like hitting like an 80-year-old man in the head with a baseball bat for real. And it's just, it's absurd. It's insane. But you're seeing like, you're seeing a handful of people in the crowd. You're seeing like probably 100 people in that crowd. And then, so the crowds are getting smaller, it's that feeling of, where the events can't muster a crowd. And then it gets to the Hunter Red situation where there's literally 10 people in the crowd. which to me is just like magnifies the darkness of this incident much, much more. And so then you see, and if you watch the tape back of right before New Jack starts to stab this guy in the ring, you can tell that Hunter Red sort of hit him in the face, and he potatoed him. And you can kind of see that, oh shit, hell's about to break loose, if you really study that.
Quickly, there's a common sort of thread, and when New Jack loses it in the ring like this, something happened in the locker room before they went out to wrestle, where New Jack felt slighted, felt not respected as a veteran, felt like this nobody is trying to dictate to him what's going to happen out there. And to hear New Jack tell it, that's like the most cardinal sin you can commit if you're not established in wrestling, is to come over and start talking to him like you have any grounds to suggest what's going to happen in the ring.
Exactly. And so then, of course, he's got this crazy blade and he pulls it out and he stabs the guy a number of times. And we're in the throes of this crazy incident with Hunter Red. Things have gone sideways. A man's been stabbed many, many, many times. And take it away, Jack. What happens next?
This is really interesting just to set the stage because, there's been talk about this incident where, and it's in the documentary, where Hunter Red agrees to drop the charges in exchange for an empty promise from New Jack that they could use this thing to get Hunter Red wrestling bookings, because they'll go around Florida where it happened in that area and sort of promote Hunter Red out for revenge for what New Jack did to him for real in the wrestling ring. And Jack, he's seen every hustle in the book. He's like, sure, yeah, let's do it. Drop the charges. Charges dropped. He skates. Never sees the guy again.
Unbelievable.
That's the story he tells, and I'm sure it's I'm sure there's a lot of truth in that, because clearly New Jack was never convicted of this assault charge. At the same time, though, something he did tell you guys in the interview, a wrinkle to the story I feel like that isn't in there, is that for some reason New Jack as well as Hunter Red required medical attention at a nearby hospital after this thing, and so they were proximate to each other in the immediate aftermath of this stabbing incident. And to hear New Jack tell it, he perhaps may have been the first one to suggest, to float the notion that they could turn this whole incident into something that could garner wider publicity and keep them paid for future wrestling bookings, to have, future showdowns over what happened here. So here's New Jack describing that scene.
They took me to the hospital, took him to the same hospital. We was in the back, and I heard him talking. And the little medic dude, he said, the guy that stabbed you is right up there.
Oh, my God.
He said, New Jack, you in here? I said, yeah, I'm here. He said, you all right? I said, yeah, you all right? He said, yeah, I got a couple of holes in me, but I'm fine.
Oh, my God.
I said, all right. He said, we good? I said, yeah, we straight. They took me to jail. I didn't give a fuck about him. But I shot him my idea. I said, I tell you what. I said, let's go on a talk show. Like a courtroom show. Judge Mathis, Judge Joe Brown, whatever, whoever. I said, let's take this on there. I said, you sue me for $5,000, which is the max. I said, I'm gonna act like the biggest dick in the world. I said, I'm gonna make sure you get your money. He was like, I can't do it. He said, I'm too embarrassed. I said, no, we'll split the money.
Oh, God.
Let's go on the fucking show. He wouldn't do it. That was the last time I talked to him.
He's got a couple of last time I talked to Hunter Red stories I've noticed, but JP, nothing Judge Mathis can't solve.
I mean, hey, I would definitely have tuned into that one for sure. And he's smart too, because the money doesn't come out of anybody's pocket. It comes out of the show's pocket.
Yeah, it's a way to get the small claims paid off. That's why people go on those shows, is because, it gets paid off not out of their pocket in exchange for agreeing to be broadcast. Yeah.
And that's crazy too. It's like $5,000 for being stabbed, 18 times or whatever it was. I can't remember how many times it was, but it's like, wow.
That's interesting. I wonder if Hunter Red would agree with that scenario, or that depiction, because you're too embarrassed to go on Judge Mathis and talk about it and actually get, national publicity, but you're not too embarrassed to ask New Jack to go around the horn with you and do a series of matches. Yeah.
It's weird because I have memories of trying to find Hunter Red.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that.
I know that we definitely tried really hard to contact him for the episode. Obviously, I mean, we wanted to.
It's like an enigma. People don't really know his history. They don't know like what he's about.
We did interview. God, I'm trying to make sure I don't butcher this, but we no pun intended. We interviewed, I think, his lawyer, or I think it was for this incident. I think it was Hunter Red's lawyer. Didn't make the episode.
Yeah, I was gonna say he's not in there. Yeah,
he's not in there. But again, it was just a runtime thing. It was like we just, we're wrapping things up when we get to Hunter Red. We could have made a whole separate episode about this incident because there was so much more to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, he never surfaced, and then he never surfaced since. He hasn't like said anything or done interviews or come out or, since the episodes aired, or, you haven't seen anything of him on YouTube, or, I mean, I haven't looked in a while, but normally when we can't find people and then the episode airs, people do kind of come out of the woodworks, and he didn't.
Not in this case.
So
Nope.
Not in this case. So that says something.
Very interesting. Even with the Jerome Young no longer with us.
Yeah, that
still
too.
Not willing to emerge.
I bet he doesn't think that New Jack is dead.
Yeah.
Well, if there's someone you can convince that a death is a work, it's a pro wrestler. I guarantee you that.
Yeah. Well,
so I guess we're.
I was just going to say one more thing too, just because on everything we've been talking about with New Jack and the character of Jerome Young versus New Jack the character. I think one thing too is like, I think New Jack still being a carny, still being a part of the wrestling business. I think that he knows, he's very aware, and I think you can tell in this interview when he's talking about these things and he's being remorseless. He's very aware of the continuing and perpetuating the legend and the mystique of the New Jack character, because he knows that wrestlers are defined by their legacies, and I think this kind of even being pushing the work as far as you can frickin' take it. Yeah, I do think there is psychopathic elements to Jerome Young the person, but I do think that he consciously plays it up as much as possible because he's always thinking about the legacy of the character.
Yeah, and never afraid to lean in to even the most notorious stories about himself.
Exactly.
It's not like he ever shied away from talking about the kinds of things that this episode so brilliantly sort of threads together, is that he's willing to lean in, he's willing to look into the camera and said, I would do it again. He's willing to lean in, look at the camera and say, I got away with cutting Mass Transit's forehead open, this 19-year-old kid, whatever he was, which is something if you can believe, we've talked about New Jack for this entire episode and barely got into Mass Transit. Tells you a lot about how much is under the hood here. But yeah. I think just in terms of summing it all up and how New Jack was able to be New Jack for so long, despite all of these, the difficult background, the confronting the racism, the antisocial tendencies, the violence, it's people love the guy. The fans loved New Jack. If you ever went to an ECW show, you saw this, and I have to say, for as intimidating and foreboding of an exterior the guy had, he loved the fans too. And he loved the ECW fans in particular. And if you ever went to a show back in the day, man, you would line up hours before the doors opened, and wrestlers that were working the show would sometimes walk the line and just shake hands. It was a small enough community of totally rabid, insane fans that was something wrestlers saw upside in. And when New Jack talked about that element of things in ECW to you guys, he talked about how Paul Heyman, who of course was the sort of mad scientist behind ECW, sort of discouraged that. He didn't really think it was necessarily the best practice to spend a lot of time rubbing elbows with the people that you want to pay tickets to see you as some kind of larger-than-life star, or just somebody that's inaccessible enough to pay to see. But New Jack thought the opposite. In fact, New Jack not only loved mixing it up with the fans, he loved sharing drugs with the fans, to hear him tell it. And in particular, if you wanted to buy his pants, he'd sell them to you, man.
God.
But here's the thing. Here's the catch. He's got to remember to empty the pockets.
I had brought these camo outfit with the pants and the shirt that was matching, but I didn't like the color of it.
He's got the best pregnant pauses.
And I had a bag of Coke. I put it in my pocket. I meant to put it in my bag, but I didn't do it. So the kid's father came up. He's like, New Jack, I will buy the shit you wearing right now. I'll buy it off your back if you sell it to me for my kid. I said, let me do my match. I'll come back. I'll give you the shit. I said, I don't want it. I said, you ain't got to buy it. I don't want it.
Huh.
And after my match, I went out there and I handed him my pants and my shirt. And I went in the back to get dressed, and I was like, where my drugs at? I was like, oh shit, they're in my pants. And I ran outside in the park, not in the parking lot, but in the audience, and the kid was sitting there, he was holding the pants around his neck. I said, give me the pants. And I snatched them from him. And his father was like, what's going on? I said, wait a minute. I said, something in the pocket I need to get. And I reached in the pocket and it was still in there. I took it out and put it in my pocket and gave back the pants and went back in the dressing room.
It's just like memory, like story time, like telling those kind of stories. There's a lot of stories that are like, you know, of that nature, or just like that have no relevance to anything we would have asked, you know, on the day, or anything that just kind of fall out of some of the wrestlers that are great. And you have nothing to do with them, you know, because you can't use them in the episode, especially a show like ours with such strict time constraints. But here it's perfect. Just like, wow, like that moment, you know, in a vacuum is great.
That's why we're doing it one way or the other, be it an 8x10 with his face crossed out or drugs in the pants. New Jack got the bag, right, JP?
He got it all.
Yeah.
He got it all.
Yeah.
Jesus. What a nut.
So this has been episode 1 of Dark Side of the Ring Unheard. As we are going back to the well for you, we hope you'll join us next time we're with you as we unearth and surface another fascinating subject buried deep in the Dark Side archives. And of course, please don't forget, Dark Side of the Ring Season 5 will premiere Tuesday, March 5th. That's 10 p.m. Eastern Time on VICETV. 10 all-new episodes coming your way, and I don't know if the response is as positive as it ought to be. Perhaps a lot more for us to chew on for future seasons here of Unheard.